And then in December, we'll be having our annual holiday party at Pioneer Balloons headquarters with lots of good wine from various places around the world. So be there or be square. Tonight, we will be hearing from Spencer Tubia, who's a native Wichitan. His family actually owns the bakery of bakeries here in town, Bagatelle. And if he has a really good experience here tonight, maybe he'll come back and bring us some free samples. Anyway, so Spencer is an associate in the International Trade Group of Crowell Moring in their DC office. And his practice focuses on advising clients in all areas of trade remedies, import regulation compliance, and international trade litigation. His experience covers an extensive range of trade remedies, including those related to anti-dumping, countervailing duties, investigations, administrative reviews, and litigation, steel and aluminum tariffs under Section 232, National Security Investigation. Before joining Crowell Moring, Spencer worked for the U.S. Department of Commerce at the International Trade Administration, conducting and initiating anti-dumping and countervailing duty investigations and reviews. Before moving to Commerce, Spencer spent his last semester of law school as a full-time intern at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit Court under Judge Evan Wallach. He helped review special appeals for the Court of International Trade. And while in law school, he served as a research assistant for Professor Raj Balaha, a renowned international trade law scholar. And before embarking on his legal career, Spencer worked for 2 years in international trade finance in the banking sector, and I'm sure he's got some good baking stories for us as well. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Spencer Tubia.
Well, thank you for the very long introduction. Now everyone knows basically everything about my life. Now it's really an honor to be speaking in front of everyone here. I remember when I had first graduated college, got a job here at Interest Bank in international banking. That was my first introduction in international business, and I regularly attended these meetings, and they really gave me kind of a great understanding about how important international trade is to the community here, and how prevalent it is in the community, not just with the larger businesses, but with the smaller businesses here. Sorry, I have to get my clicker here.
Andrew didn't show me. Okay.
Maybe I should have tried this out before.
Oops, sorry.
Oh, it's okay. Okay. It's got to talk to the computer. There we go. Oh, set the mood. For some very racy international trade discussions. These tariffs are they're exciting stuff. So, like I said, started my career in international business here in Wichita at Interest Bank, and attended these meetings regularly through Dima De Silva, Dr. Dima De Silva, and her late husband, Dr. Dahmer De Silva, who have known me my entire life, basically. Every time I see Dima, she reminds me about how little I was when she first knew me. And so it's really, truly a blessing to be able to speak in front of everyone here. Now, I work at the law firm of Crowell Moring, as Daniel said in a very extensive introduction. And I work in international trade law. Basically, I'm representing a lot of importers on the import side and less on the export side. So I think this will provide a nice perspective, especially hearing about the subject from next month, which seems like it will be very export-oriented, because dealing with a lot of the foreign exchange issues. So, and on the import side, until the Trump administration came along, it really was seen almost as an afterthought, right? There were products, you got those products, you knew exactly what tariff those products were going to be coming in on. You knew, and if those were inputs on your production, if you produce here in the United States, you knew exactly what your costs were going to be. Now, under the administration, not so much. Things are changing at a really fast pace. There we go. Did you do that?
Yeah.
It's all right.
Give me the word.
If not, then, you know, I'll have to make do. The green light. The green light means on. Red light means off. Okay. There we go. So I work at Crowell Moring. We're an international trade law firm. We have offices in D.C., New York, San Francisco, Brussels, London. We represent a wide array of clients. But specifically, I work in an international trade group. On the import and, like I said, on the export side, my practice focuses primarily on imports. Now, before this, I worked at the Department of Commerce, doing something a little bit called anti-dumping and countervailing duty investigations, which is just dry trade speak for cheap products coming into the United States. Well, the Department of Commerce slaps them with tariffs if they're too cheap, and if they hurt U.S. businesses. So that's where I used to work before. We have a monthly trade blog and a newsletter and international trade if anyone's interested. So what I'm here to talk about today are the administration's, basically, their two main trade actions and tools that they've been using. And it's not a secret that the administration has been very aggressive with tariffs. And these are the ways that they've been able to introduce, they've attempted to introduce these tariffs through these two methods. And the first one is Section 232. And I'm not going to give you the entire name of the act in legal speak. And then the second one, Section 301. Now, Section 232 deals with it's a little known provision in the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, and it deals with imports that have an effect on national security of the country. So this is a very rarely used provision. These were the only three cases, basically, where an investigation was granted and whatever administration during the time actually implemented something. There never has been tariffs implemented over Section 232, even though it's widely believed after reading the law that you can introduce tariffs. Now, Section 232, is a provision that allows the Department of Commerce first to investigate whether certain inputs, or certain imports, imports, have an effect on the national security of the United States. And the requirement is the Department of Commerce first has to introduce an investigation to determine whether that's the case, and then after that investigation, they give a recommendation to the President. These were the cases where there was one, an investigation, and two, they recommended the President do something, right? Before that, so there have been 14 times where these investigations have actually been implemented, and these are the only 3 times where something has occurred after that. And none of these occasions resulted in tariffs. until now. So these are the big steel tariffs and aluminum tariffs that we've been hearing about, but mostly they call them Trump steel tariffs, right? It's 25% tariff on steel and aluminum products, 10% tariff on aluminum products, after the Department of Commerce had decided, or they reached an investigation, they said that having steel production in the United States is essential to the national security of our country. In order to implement that, the president enacted 25% tariffs on steel products and aluminum products. These came into effect both on March 8th, 2018. And since then, basically, importers have been, and you can imagine how many businesses use basic steel products like carbon. These are basic semi-finished and finished steel products that are used throughout the entire production cycle. And they're very important for producers in the United States. And all of a sudden, basically, a 25% tariff is slapped on those items. And they're slapped on all items coming from around the world, except a few exceptions. And I'll get to those later. A few countries where we have quota agreements. And these are the aluminum products too. Aluminum is an input used quite a bit as well. So as I had stated earlier, the reason cited by the administration, national security concerns, but the true underlying reason for the steel tariffs, and you can see this from the president's tweets to his campaign speeches, was overcapacity of steel in China. So the belief that the Chinese were producing way too much steel for their own use. It was flooding the world markets, driving down costs, and hurting U.S. producers. So, okay, so China's doing this. Why enact a tariff on basically the rest of the world then? Well, there is a thing called transshipment where companies can move their steel to, the Chinese producers can send their steel to Vietnam or India or plenty of other countries, and that gets shipped to the United States. That's really hard to track. And there have been anti-dumping orders on steel products from China for a very, very long time, and those still really haven't driven down the excess capacity of steel in the marketplace. So really the administration felt that it was necessary to include all of the imports of steel in the investigation, rather than just imports of steel and aluminum coming from China. Now, like I said earlier, these are the results. There are certain countries that are exempted from these 25% and 10% duties. These have all reached negotiated quota agreements with the United States: South Korea, Brazil, Argentina, Australia. Once these quotas are met, then the common belief is that the 25% tariffs will apply to any excess imports that go above that quota. So, 25% tariffs, big deal. What really were comments, what were the reactions from, businesses in the United States? And it faced a large opposition from the business community. If you look at the comments that were filed with the Department of Commerce during the 232 hearing and comment process, the overwhelming majority of the businesses were opposed to the additional tariffs. And there were those U.S. businesses who were doing very well now that supported them. And U.S. Steel is an example. Larger steel companies like Nucor and AK Steel, and United Steelworkers Union, they all supported the 232 tariffs. Now, of course, this opposition stirred the fact of that prices are going to increase. So tariffs will raise the cost of steel for these products from the United States. A lot of these products are not produced by U.S. producers, so it takes some time for U.S. producers to develop the capacity to supply these products. So the tariffs also caused a pause or delay in a lot of companies' production capabilities. And one of the main reasons why a lot of companies and agricultural interests in the area were opposed to these tariffs was retaliation. There's a WTO agreement called the Agreement on Safeguards that gives countries the ability to immediately retaliate on tariffs if they feel that legal safeguard has occurred. They treat these as safeguards. There's some argument about whether they are in fact safeguards or not. But there has been significant retaliation on the side of most of our largest trading partners. And those have come from the United States, EU, Japan, China, Canada, Mexico, Russia, Turkey, India. And the products that have been part of these retaliation efforts have been steel and aluminum products, but mostly a lot of uniquely American products. And a good example of this is bourbon, right? Bourbon can only be, under law, produced in the United States. So when you enact a retaliatory tariff on bourbon, you're basically only hitting products that are produced in the United States. And the retaliatory tariffs have also hit a lot of agricultural products like orange juice and pork that are, and a lot of people say they're targeted towards the red states. And you'll see that more and I'll talk about this later, during the Section 301 retaliations that China made. They really pinpointed these tariffs to, these retaliatory tariffs to hit certain areas of the country. So kind of the next step then. So these tariffs are in place. What can a company do if they use a lot of these products? It's not available. They need these products to produce what they're making, and they don't want to pay the extra 25% duty, which is substantial. There's options of, well, if you don't sell in the United States, you could always open an FTZ, a free trade zone. You could try to reclassify your products, but really the biggest next step for companies has been exclusion requests. And I don't want to get into the procedural details of exclusion requests, but the thing that I want to hit most is these have been hit with an incredible amount of red tape and delays. There's a huge backlog in exclusion requests. So American companies have the ability to submit forms and requests to the Department of Commerce and BIS. BIS is the administration that normally does export controls in ITAR and EAR, and they have the duty of now enforcing the Section 232 duties. And that includes dealing with the incredible amount of exclusion requests that have come in. As you can see, based on a study on Bloomberg BNA, there's been approximately 30,000 requests in steel alone. And 77% of them have not received a decision. Exclusion requests can go on for months and months and months before they are even posted on BIS's system to allow for public comment. And even after that, there's a required 90-day period where 30-day period where the parties can object to certain exclusion requests. And basically, if a U.S. industry objects to these exclusion requests, it's almost a death knell. It functions as a death knell to the request. So parties basically now they issued revised clarification procedural rules that say once a party's exclusion request is posted, there's 106 days before the Department of Commerce can make a decision, which is a long amount of time, especially if you're waiting for your inputs of production. But we've seen periods a lot longer than that. So there is something companies can do to try to avoid these 232 tariffs on steel and aluminum coming from around the world, and they can post an exclusion request. But those requests have been met with huge amount of red tape and time. So that's kind of the first, that deals with the steel and aluminum tariffs. Now, there were two recently enacted 232 investigations. Like I said, there's an investigatory phase. Those deal with uranium products and, more importantly, automobile parts. That's going to be the next big fight. There has already been hearings held at the department, and there have been a comment period that's come and passed where huge amount of, like with the steel tariffs, huge amount of U.S. businesses filed comments against the tariffs, including, which is interesting, the United Auto Workers were very apprehensive to supporting the tariffs as well, which is interesting to see because the United Steel Workers union were very quick to jump and support the additional tariffs. Not so much with the United Auto Workers. They do have operations in Canada. Another big difference between the automobile and automobile parts investigation is that the new NAFTA, so the new negotiated U.S., Mexico, Canada free trade agreement, includes a provision that says the United States cannot include Mexico or Canada in any additional automobile and automobile part tariffs that were initiated under Section 232. So if the new trade agreement comes into effect, Canada and Mexico could be spared, but our European trade partners certainly have a lot of interest in the U.S. market, and they're not big fans of the tariffs. Neither are the U.S. producers, by the way. So, and this comes to the next tool that the administration has used, and this is Section 301. Section 301 is a provision that allows the president to take action on what they deem as unfair trade practices to U.S. businesses. And in this instance, those unfair trade practices that were cited by the administration were the Chinese practices against the intellectual property rights of U.S. companies. And as a result of the initial investigation, which is different from Section 232, it was initiated by the USTR. It deals with China only. It doesn't relate to national security. The appropriate action that USTR deemed necessary and that the president signed off on was to apply tariffs. Originally, the tariffs were supposed to be on $50 billion worth of products. And now there have been 3 waves of additional tariffs. The first one finalized at $34 billion worth of goods. It's 25% ad valorem duty, which is additional duty on these certain products from China. It includes 818 of the originally proposed, 1,300 tariff lines. So 818 products from China. And like with 232, there's an exclusion request process. I'm going to get to that later on. that ended October 9th. So if a company is being hit by these tariffs that come in under list 1, their time to submit exclusion requests is over. Then recently after that, the Chinese announced that they would apply retaliatory tariffs, and in response, the United States enacted a second list 2, on $16 billion worth of products, 279 tariff items. There's an exclusion request process for that as well. And then this is the big kicker. List 3 is $200 billion worth of products coming in from China. It's a 10% ad valorem duty until January 2019, where it's raised to 25%. This came into effect in September, and includes 5,745 products, individual types of products coming in from China under the harmonized tariff system. It's a huge, huge, huge amount of goods coming in from China. And after that was enacted, what happened? Well, the Chinese basically retaliated immediately on $60 billion worth of imports coming in from the United States. Within the president's press release, the president said, well, if the Chinese retaliate on this list, then I will immediately, as soon as possible, begin a new phase of tariffs, which is list 4, which could be possibly $267 billion worth of imports coming in from China. To put that in perspective, if you include all of these lists together, that could cover basically, effectively, all imports of goods coming in from China. And those would be hit presumptively with a 10 and 25% and 25% tariffs. Now, like with the 232 investigation, the reaction from the business community was very, 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 very much strongly against these tariffs. There were over 6,000 separate comments filed with the USTR during the comment and hearing phases of these 3 lists. A vast majority of those were vehemently, from businesses, were vehemently against enacting these tariffs. And you know, one of the biggest reasons too is not just because their inputs are being hit. You know, their inputs are being hit with this additional tariff, or if they're an importer and they sell these goods that are being produced in China, those are being those will be hit with additional costs as well. It's not that it's also causing disruptions in supply chains, which, as you know, have become so integrated over the years that to find another supplier or another factory takes a very, very, very long time, especially ones that produce products to the specifications that a lot of producers demand. But one of the biggest reasons why so many people were against these tariffs were the retaliations. And so here are some of the products that were hit with the latest group of retaliatory tariffs from China. You had aircraft parts. These are relevant to the region. There are, and like with all of these lists, and like with these retaliation lists, if you would like a list of these products, I can certainly provide these to you. I have searchable Excel files with all of the tariff lines included. But these are relevant to the area. You have aircraft parts, small and medium-sized aircraft, agricultural products, wheat, gluten, soybeans, pork products, beef products, corn products. The Chinese did a very good job in pinpointing these specific products that are produced in, to be blunt, in red states. That's why you would see even agricultural groups who are not involved in international trade at all provide comments against these, like the Farm Bureaus. There are an incredible amount of comments filed on behalf of farmers and the Farm Bureau as a whole who are against these products. who are against these tariffs. So, really, kind of what's next? Well, like I said, there's list 4. There's possibly more retaliations. Industries that have not been drawn in the fight, that have been spared so far, will most certainly be drawn in if this gets to a point where literally all exports from the United States into China are covered by retaliatory tariffs, and all imports from China into the United States are covered by Section 301 tariffs. These industries that have not seen increases in tariffs, large aircraft, agricultural, more agricultural products, cell phones or iPhones were spared for now, and footwear. These are all goods that are imported from China in mass amounts that were spared by the previous list, but could be hit by another list, and our exports to China, they could be hit by retaliatory tariffs. So, kind of, my closing remarks on this. The WTO Director General said that if this trade war continues, the whole world could lose out on 17.5% of all international trade. Now, that's a huge amount. And the question is then, well, is this the new normal? Or are these tariffs just a negotiating tool meant to get China to the negotiating table? To be honest, no one knows. There is a feeling amongst many people that this is the new norm. These tariffs are here to stay for a very, very long time. There are those that believe that there will be a grand bargain, that the administration will yield and that the Chinese government will yield and produce concessions. The next steps in this whole process would be WTO litigation, which takes years and years to complete. And this region might know about the Boeing and Airbus disputes that took almost a decade to get through the entire WTO dispute settlement system. These tariffs are on their way. The Chinese have filed complaints against the U.S. The Europeans, the Canadians, the Mexicans have all filed complaints in the World Trade Organization, but that will take years to settle. And there is a question of whether using the national security rule or exemption, which is exempted in the World Trade Agreement, would essentially, I don't want to say blow up the World Trade Organization, but it puts the World Trade Organization dispute settlement body in a very precarious position, because of course they don't want to be a body trying to tell another sovereign country what is in their national security interests. However, they still want to protect the system that this order was built on, and ensure that in instances where national security really isn't the main underlying reason for introducing a tariff, and if that's the case, there should be an ability to adjudicate. Now that's a very fine tightrope that they're going to have to walk during this whole process, and that's kind of the next step in this process. So, and with that, I welcome any questions. I welcome any questions. Yes, in the back.
What are the teeth that the WTO has once they make a ruling? We have lived in the last few years in a world of a few giants, and that move many times unilaterally. There's a lot of world organizations,
Yep.
but at the end of the day, what is their ability to enforce their rulings once they provide a ruling?
Yep. So that's a good question. The World Trade Organization has a very unique set of, and like you said, enforcement teeth that says if they come up with a ruling and another country doesn't abide by those rulings, the country that's harmed can enact more tariffs as a result, and those tariffs would be legal under the system. So they kind of get a pass to enact more tariffs or to do any other kind of trade remedy they deem necessary to counteract. So it's giving permission to retaliate, basically. That's the teeth that they have, and that retaliation would be wholly sanctioned by the World Trade Organization. And that's a unique set of teeth that a lot of organizations, world organizations, don't have. And for a long time, a lot of people argue that's kind of the crown jewel of the dispute settlement process, right? The ability to settle these agreements using stick and carrot in a way that doesn't involve sovereign nations getting involved with other sovereign nations, but it involves a method and a system that's still attractive, and it still provides an incentive to follow the rules. So that's the teeth that they have. Anyone else?
You said that Canada and Mexico would be excluded from the import tariffs under like the new version
Yeah.
of NAFTA. What would stop Mexico or Canada from purchasing like steel or aluminum from China per se, and then just selling it to us? Because you said that's very hard to track.
Yeah, exactly. So I need to clarify, Mexico and Canada would be, based on the new NAFTA, would be exempted from the automobile tariffs.
Oh.
Yeah, they still, the steel and aluminum tariffs still apply to Mexico and Canada. And that was not negotiated, that was something that was not negotiated, it was wholly separate in the NAFTA agreements. But your question in general, well, what would stop China from exporting their steel into other countries and them re-exporting that, or producing in those other countries and selling that in the United States? Well, that's a legitimate concern that businesses have here. That certain input, that other countries are getting those inputs at cheaper prices, and they're producing downstream products and selling those in the United States, which puts those businesses that produce downstream products in a precarious position, and some would argue have a competitive disadvantage. Now, the Canadians and the Europeans have enacted something called a safeguard against steel, which means that they now anticipate a huge flood of steel coming in from China. It has to go somewhere, and they anticipate it's going to come to those countries. So they actually enacted safeguard tariffs against Chinese steel too.
Wow.
Yeah. But still, that's one thing of unilaterally applying tariffs that it's overlooked, right? So it's not just with steel and aluminum, but if, let's for instance say you have a capacitor that's created in China, and originally it was imported in the United States to produce a widget, a cell phone, or a clicker for a laptop that works. And that a tariff's enacted, that input can no longer be provided at a low cost. Someone else in some other country produces that using that cheap input and then sells it in the United States at a cheaper price. So that's an argument that a lot of U.S. businesses have made that have been opposed to these tariffs. Yes?
Maybe as a consumer and maybe also from a business perspective, at least I can speak for myself, maybe not for everybody, we've seen a lot of comments from suppliers that maybe availability of steel is not there, the prices have gone up. So as a business, you're kind of trying to manage your costs, maybe not directly because maybe you're not directly importing the steel, but yet the products that you're selling, you need that raw material.
Yep.
So you hear that the supply chain is having a hard time getting the steel or the prices have gone up. And even though I think maybe I can speak for most of us, we've kind of adjusted to that new normal, or maybe putting clauses in our contracts to protect somehow the pricing. I guess from your perspective, have you seen or do you have any recommendations of what businesses can do? Because yes, maybe it helps the steel industry and helps that, but on the other hand, from a business perspective, what can we do in our contracts to protect? And then from a consumer standpoint, for example, I was getting a quote for our new AC conditioners, like, well, our prices went up, so therefore your new HVAC system is, 20% higher than what used to be a few months ago.
Yeah, and prices are going up across the board. Some have blamed these tariffs for the recent increase in prices in general. The question that you have is a very common question. From the consumer's standpoint, it puts consumers certainly in a difficult position. And from a business standpoint, businesses have been trying to do their best to get around these via exclusion requests, and some have been successful. There are stories of businesses that have filed these requests and they've been exempted from these tariffs. But what you say, consumers and producers alike having to deal with increased costs is these are real costs, and especially from the 301 standpoint, once the tariff lines start increasing and more products are starting to become wrapped up into this whole fight, prices are going to go up, and that's just an inevitability. So I'm sorry if I didn't answer your question as far as what can we do. I think what we can do is, what businesses can do is certainly either produce outside of China or file exclusions, which they can do with Section 301 and 332. But it's been a problem. Yes.
One more question and no more from But, okay, short term, it's evident and obvious what's going to happen. It leads into this trade war, if you would, through tariffs. But in the long run, what is your assessment? Eventually, everything reaches a balance, okay? Is the United States going to come out eventually better off by bringing certain industries again into play, the steel industry and other? I mean, in the long run, what is going to be, because we know in the next 3 years is going to be a mess and things are going to go up and everything. What is your vision, let's say 5 to 7 years from now? Is the resurgence of U.S. steel going to be a beneficial one in the long run, or is really never going to get back there and we're just playing a game that is going to hurt everybody?
Yeah. So before I answer this question, I forgot to give my little disclaimer before the speech that all of these are my opinion only and don't represent the opinions of Crowell Moring and our clients or partners alike, and this is all completely strictly off the record. I wanted to clarify that.
But on camera.
In general, but on camera. My answer to that question is really, a lot of analysts don't know, to be honest. Companies have had to deal with import compliance, customs, duties. These are all foreign terms to a lot of companies. They've never had to deal with this stuff before. And as far as long-term goes, really, what I've heard, right, is, well, you're going to have a fight between the U.S. and the Chinese, and whoever blinks first, whoever's going to make concessions are the ones that win. Well, in that scenario, no one really wins, right? Because there's still a lot of over that period of time, there's a lot of trade that's going to disappear. And I really can't give a fair assessment of what's going to happen in the long term. Whether the steel companies are going to be able to produce at enough capacity to supply, to fill demand, that's a question. A lot of companies say it takes multiple years for them to be able to ship production elsewhere, a lot of companies say, okay, you're going to enact these tariffs from Chinese products, we're going to move our production to Vietnam or Thailand or somewhere where, or Mexico or somewhere where labor prices are low and the cost of production is low. But that again, that takes years to accomplish, especially if you own the means of production in those other in those other countries, and you don't source from another source. So, and China's well known for having a very strong infrastructure. It took years for them to build their infrastructure in the way that it is, and a lot of other countries don't have that infrastructure. They don't have the roads, and they don't have broadband internet. They don't have these things that Chinese companies do have. So, long-term wise, my personal assessment is production will move to other countries, and prices will probably go back down again. But that's just my own opinion. Especially if these tariffs stay in place from China. And on the steel side, no one really knows what's going to happen on the steel side. Whether the U.S. companies will have the production capacity to supply the demand of construction companies and manufacturers in the United States, that's still an unknown. Anyone else? Yep.
Yeah, I have one last one. Is there, do you know of a way that these exemptions that are passing, is there a common theme to what they're requesting for exemption that maybe companies that are looking to follow that path could also apply for that similar exemption?
Yeah, so under 301, an exemption, if an exemption is filed, it could theoretically be granted for a whole bunch of different products, right? If you file an exemption for a clicker, laptop clicker, every single product would be exempted. They haven't granted any exemptions yet for Section 301. For 232, a company has to file an exemption for every single variation of the product. And this is part of the reason why there's so many requests and there's so much red tape. If a company produces a certain amount of microphones, right, and this microphone is 13 inches, but they also sell one at 12 inches, they have to submit 2 separate exclusion requests for those. In the steel, and with steel products, you can imagine, right, when you have certain various levels of grades, thicknesses, that's why the amount built up. But really the standard for those exclusion requests is whether there is enough capacity in the United States to supply demand of those products. Immediately supply the demand. That's the legal standard. So that's what they're looking for. Looking to see if U.S. Steel can produce those products that are requested right now. And if they can't, by law, they should request. They should accept those requests.
Sounds like this going to hit Walmart already.
Walmart's been hit hard by Amazon already, so I think these tariffs are the least of their worries. Yeah.
You mentioned at the beginning that some companies were in support of the tariffs.
Yep.
Has that changed in increased or decreased with the addition of new tariffs? And does that have any kind of effect on whether there's the potential of increasing more tariffs or a hope of it potentially backing off sooner rather than later?
Yeah. Well, that's a good question. When I base it on that, there's a common in hearing process before during the investigation process where companies can, and individuals, you or I, people, any person could submit a comment during the investigation, and that comment is supposed to be reviewed by the investigating authority. And when I said companies overwhelmingly disapproved of the tariffs, that was during that process, before the tariffs came into effect. That's a good question of whether a lot of companies have changed their mind or they've actually done better. U.S. Steel is doing very, very, very well. The steel companies are doing very, very well. They are producing at record levels. They are hiring more people. They are bringing people back to work to their and they are very sophisticated in their use of trade law. They've always been. They've always taken advantage of anti-dumping laws too. So U.S. Steel is doing well. The larger steel companies are doing well now, and they certainly approve of these methods. And I'm not sure the other businesses that have changed. That's a good question, though. That would be a good research project. Definitely.
The WTO recently made a statement talking about how pretty much like it's not just any individual country that's producing like all of this record amounts of steel. It's kind of the global output that has really surged recently, and it's kind of one country trying to play the blame game against any other country and being like, oh, well, they're producing way much more, so let's slap some more tariffs on them. But if production is surging globally, then all of these tariffs seem very unsustainable. So like, where exactly does the buck stop? Because you can't just keep slapping on tariffs whenever people keep producing more and more.
So the question was, where does this all stop in terms of countries in general are cranking out steel production. It's not just China that's been producing a lot of steel, and that adds to the global steel market. And so kind of like, if countries are playing tit for tat with tariffs, what's the end game? Basically, I think is the question. And like I said earlier, that's a difficult question to answer. It depends on the political climate here in the United States. It depends on how well the stakeholders are able to express their opinions in Washington. And that also depends on how high prices are going to get. And if prices get really, really, really high, people are gonna react to that, and that may change the political attitude towards trade. Because right now, trade is not it's almost, I wouldn't say an afterthought, and this is what it's been like in politics for a very long time too. Trade's seen as kind of a wonky subject that's followed by not a lot of people. It's not seen as something that moves votes one way or another. But if prices go up substantially, then you bet people will pay more attention to it. So, yeah, I think that's a very good question as well.
Yeah, I have to imagine that with all the talk of a new Cold War with China, unlike the Cold War with Russia, where we weren't big trading partners, we're in uncharted territory.
We are. There's an old trade kind of theory that's called peace through trade, and no one ever brings this up when they're arguing about the benefits or like the pros and cons of international trade. But when countries interact with each other, when they trade goods and services, and people cross borders, there's less chance of them getting involved in a war with each other. So that's something that's not brought up a lot, but it's definitely an important factor.
Well, Spencer, thank you. Thank you, everyone. I look forward to seeing everybody here on November 15th. Drive safe.
I'll go file on the couch. Once those iPhones start getting a little more expensive, people are going to start calling.
Did you turn this off?
Not yet.